here. Well, welcome everyone to our second Cooking with Chemo class. We have Chef Ryan here, and I will let him take it away. So welcome, and thanks for joining.
Okay, hey everyone, it's Chef Ryan Callahan. Welcome back to class 2 of the new 5-part Cooking for Chemo series. So just to recap what we learned. So last week, what we talked about was what is food, what is flavor, how do you perceive the world, right? We have our 5 senses: taste, touch, sight, smell, and sound. And of course, we have memory and association. That's the filter with which we use to understand the world, right? And we went through and we tasted the 5 flavors: salty, savory, spicy, sour, and sweet. So like I talked about, there's a lot of side effects to chemotherapy, and we went through a lot of different really great ways inside of your cooking to combat that, like loss of appetite. It's all about rebuilding that romance. With food, it's about relearning your palate, keeping track of the changes, because remember, like we talked about, if you think that something's going to taste like this and you expect it to taste like this and it doesn't align and it's not the same, and you take a bite out of it and all of a sudden it tastes totally wrong, or it smells wrong, or it looks wrong, or it feels wrong, it's just going to totally freak you out, right? You're just like, oh, this is gross, right? If you want a Big Mac and it tastes like a chocolate donut, you're going to be like, my expectations are not met. This is not what we want, right? So our sense of taste is the reward. It's just 5 flavors: salty, savory, spicy, sour, and sweet. Our sense of smell is our first sense we use to build our appetite from a distance. Our sight is how we see things. It's how we perceive the world. It tells us color and sight and all these other great things like art. And is this pretty? Is this not? Et cetera, et cetera. The illustration I always like to use is, do these jeans make my butt look fat? Then does this smell good? Does this feel good in my mouth? It's that sense of touch. Is it hot? Is it cold? Does it sound? How does the sound go with it? If you listen to mariachi music, if you're going to a Mexican restaurant and you hear mariachi music, you're like, oh, this makes sense. But if you go to a Mexican restaurant and you hear Japanese music, you're gonna be a little freaked out, right? You're gonna be like, what is happening here, right? So that's kind of basically what we went through. We had loss of appetite, metallic taste, nausea, mouth sores, et cetera, et cetera. So part 2, this is the building on it. That's kind of the crash course on how you get started on it. And so what we're going to do today in an hour or less is we're going to talk about some really important, albeit some dry subjects that you really do need to know, though, because they're really important. And I have it actually broken up into 3 parts. It's safety and sanitation, basic nutrition, and meal planning. And then afterwards, you guys are more than welcome to ask me questions. We're recording the class. And so we're going to ask all the questions at the very end. And also, just so you guys know, there is a video for the first class that's pre-recorded that we'll be sending out to you guys to be able to review it. And then next week, we'll be getting into recipes. It'll be the cold recipes and the ready to eat. And then we'll have a soup. And then we'll have the last class, we'll be bringing it all together with a multi-step recipe. So part 1, safety and sanitation. Safety and sanitation, when you're cooking for chemotherapy patients, and especially for yourself if you're going through chemo or if you're a caregiver, is unbelievably important. It's such a dry, boring subject. I had to take a 6-week class on safety and sanitation in culinary school. It's that important. You have to have a food license and you have to get it renewed every 4 years and take that 6-week class over again. And it basically breaks down to this idea that food, it has contaminants on it, right? Like bacterias and viruses. It can get chemicals on it. It can get all kinds of stuff. Now, normally, if you're healthy and you're good and you're exercising, you've got no problems, right? Your body just kind of fights it off on a regular basis, unless it's got a lot of really bad food poisoning. But for example, lettuce has a lot of wild yeast and wild bacteria on it. Another thing that happens is kind of gross, but it grows out in nature, in the dirt with the bugs and the deer and the other animals. And sometimes they go through the fields and they poop on the lettuce. And that's kind of gross to say, but it does. And that's why whenever you see a massive E. coli recall on lettuce, it's because the fields were contaminated typically with cow or deer poop. And that's actually why that happens. And the unfortunate part about raw veggies and things like that is that unless you cook them, there's no way to kill the bacteria. And you can't wash them with soap because that becomes a chemical contaminant, which makes you sick as well. And when I say sick, I mean gets you food poisoning. And The reason this is really important to think about, especially if you have a compromised immune system or you're going through cancer treatments, is because you have a compromised immune system if you're going through chemo treatments, right? It suppresses everything in your body. Chemo doesn't affect just one part, it affects all of it, right? And it suppresses your immune system, makes, the littlest virus or the littlest bug or the littlest bacteria horrible. As a matter of fact, speaking of all this, my grandmother actually just had food poisoning the other day. She, of course, calls it what everybody else calls it. Oh, I just had the 12-hour flu or the 12-hour or the 24-hour bug, right? Well, that's not a real thing. That's food poisoning. And there's different kinds, and we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the exact details of the different things and where they come from. But we're going to just talk about what safety and sanitation is and how we can keep a clean kitchen and how we can avoid getting food poisoning, because the whole idea here with cooking for chemo is to eat more food to keep your nutrients up, to keep your calories up so that we don't lose weight during treatment. Because a lot of times with chemotherapy, right, we lose weight, nothing tastes good, we have disinterest in food. And if we're already having trouble getting food down, we don't want to make it any more difficult to keep it down, right? So number one, cancer patients have compromised immune system. This is the first part of safety and sanitation. This is a fact. This is just what it is. If we aren't safety and sanitation conscious, we can cause extra problems like food poisoning, which of course further depletes a person's ability to eat and recover. So how do we avoid this, right? We want to do a couple of things. We want to keep hot food hot and cold food cold, right? So when you get food, right, you cook it, okay? So chicken is supposed to be cooked to 165 degrees, and then all the bacteria that's inside of it is cooked. Now, there's a thing called the danger zone. We won't get too much into that, but cooking temperatures are actually really important. And I got a lot of resources on my site. You could actually just search online on that big search site if you'd like to use it. Just say, proper cooking temperatures, right? So there's specific temperatures that food has to be reheated to. And there's specific temperatures that food needs to be held under when it's being preserved for a long time. So for example, cold foods, right? Like lettuce, deli meat, cheeses, milk, any of those things you put in your refrigerator, right? You want to make sure that refrigerator is under 40 degrees. That's because everything between 141 and 144 is what we call the danger zone. Danger zone, danger, Will Robinson, right? It's like that idea. It's dangerous because it allows bacteria to grow like crazy in it, and that causes food poisoning. Lots of different types of bacteria cause it: Salmonella, E. coli, botulinum, and other stuff that I can't remember off the top of my head right now, so forgive me. But we want to keep hot foods, if they're pre-cooked, over 145 degrees. The idea here is that if we pre-cook something like chicken to 165, needs to be there for 30 seconds. And the reason is it kills all the bacteria inside of the chicken and on the outside. And if we're going to reheat it after it's cooked, we want to reheat it also to 145 degrees as well. So that's the danger zone. That helps us avoid the bacteria. So keeping hot food hot and cold food cold. Number two is cross-contamination. Cross-contamination is a process where bacteria from one item moves to another item. So typically, it's when you cut things kind of in the wrong order. So if you think of it like this, there are food that is more dangerous and there's food that's less dangerous. So for example, you can eat fruits completely raw, right? You can just cut them up, nothing wrong with them. They're not going to cross-contaminate anything. The wild yeast and stuff is going to be killed. Sorry, this is such a dry subject, but it's just really important to know. The wild yeast and bacteria that occurs on them will be killed at any cooking temperature, right, that you cook it to, okay? So if a little bit of that bacteria from that apple gets on, say, a piece of pork, right? Well, that piece of pork has to be cooked to 155 degrees before it's considered okay or well done to eat, right? That's when everything has been cooked through it and all the bacteria has been killed. What happens though is if it goes in reverse, right? If you cut your raw pork, and then you cut your raw veggies on top of it, because those raw veggies aren't cooked to the same temperature, like they're eaten just completely raw, like an apple or broccoli. Sorry, my nose itches like crazy, guys. Because that pork, the runoff from the pork or the tofu or whatever it is that has to be cooked, because that bacteria will live and cause food poisoning at that lower temperature, like 40 or 50 or 60 degrees if you eat it raw. It's called cross-contamination. When one thing, like for example, the bacteria from pork or beef or chicken moves on to a lower item. Now there's a different kind of cross-contamination that we need to talk about, and it's called chemical cross-contamination. Chemical cross-contamination is what occurs when you have a chemical contaminant like degreaser or bleach or soap that ends up on the outside of food, and then you ingest it. And what can happen there is exactly the same thing as if you had eaten a bunch of bad bacteria. It also can make you nauseous and make you throw up and give you the big diarrhea word. We'll call that the D word from here on out, which you don't want because that causes fluid loss and loss of appetite and all these other things. And that's the opposite of what we want to do. So that's cross-contamination in a nutshell. So we don't want, so when we're cutting things, like let's say we're making dinner, we want to start with our veggies first, okay? Veggies, cheeses, ready to eat food, anything that's just ready to eat, you could eat it exactly as it is. The next thing we want to cut is going to be like any seafood, any mammal products, which is going to be like pork, beef, veal, et cetera, right? And then the next one is poultry, because poultry is technically actually the most dangerous because the bacteria on it lives to 165 degrees, which is going to be chicken, turkey, Cornish game hens, anything that flies, any kind of bird. You got to cook it to at least 165 degrees. And then we want to think about that in our refrigerator as well. We want to keep our raw foods, especially our raw meats, at the bottom of the refrigerator and our veggies and things at the top. That way, if some liquid falls off one of the other things, like if liquid from a chicken falls off onto your veggies that you're going to eat raw, you don't give yourself food poisoning. Which brings us to the next idea. We talked about chemical contamination. Well, what's the difference between clean and sanitized or sterilized? Clean is a visual status, right? You look at it, it's an aesthetic value. You look at it, and a lot of times they'll use modern house design. Oh yes, it's a very clean form of design, right? Sanitized is a scientific state. Sanitized or sterilized is a scientific state where it's devoid of foreign bodies, right? The bacteria is dead, the viruses are inert, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure you guys have been hearing a lot about this since COVID came out, right? They're always like, wash your hands, cover your mouth, don't touch your face, right? This is stuff that we've been doing in restaurants since the beginning of my career, which was 20 years ago. We want to make sure we don't cross-contaminate, right? If you touch something that's dirty, touch it to your face, right? That's cross-contamination as well. So people will look at things and say, oh, that's clean, right? Well, something may be clean, like you look at it and go, oh, that looks clean, right? Like I took a dry paper towel and wiped all the crumbs off the countertop and now I don't see any crumbs, but that's not sanitized. And when we have a compromised immune system, it's really important to make sure that the surfaces are sanitized or sterilized. There's a couple really easy ways to do it, right? We can just use soap and water. We can use vinegar and water, and because it's got the acid, you can use baking soda and water. Another great way is you take a capful of bleach, right? You get a little bit of bleach. You literally use a capful of it into a gallon of hot water, and that's sterilizing solution. That's what we use in restaurants, actually. You just use a gallon of hot water and a capful of bleach and a rag, and you can wipe down all your surfaces. So you clean your surfaces with soap and water, make sure all the debris is off, and then you can go in with your lightly damp rag with the bleach water on it, and you just wipe everything down. It's one of the cheapest, easiest ways to sterilize any surface, and it works on everything. If you have really nice countertops or really nice floors, bleach isn't always the best choice, but there are always great alternatives. Like I said, baking soda and vinegar work really good. Those are all ways to sterilize and kill things and clean up as well. And keeping your surfaces sanitized is really important because it helps prevent cross-contamination, which is, like we talked about, it's where the bacteria goes from one thing to another. So let's say you're cutting chicken, right? And you wiped off your cutting board just with a dry paper towel, and then you started cutting your fruit. Well, because that wasn't properly cleaned and properly sterilized, properly sanitized, not only is there going to be chicken juice on the cutting board, it's probably going to be on your countertop. And if you just wipe that down with a dry paper towel, that whole kitchen is now just one gigantic food poisoning attack waiting to happen. And that is not how I want to spend my night or my day, right? So that's really important. So that brings us to the fourth part, which is clean your surfaces and wash your hands, right? Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. If you ever worked in a restaurant, you'll never wash your hands so much as when you work in a restaurant. I had a waitress actually that I managed who would never wash her hands. She'd touch her face, she'd smoke a cigarette, she'd touch her hair, and she would never wash her hands. She'd touch other people's food. It was gross. And I'd followed her around for an entire week. Every time she touched her face or did something gross that cross-contaminated, I'd go, wash your hands, wash your hands. And I ended up counting, she ended up having to wash her hands 20 times an hour because she was just doing those kinds of things that cross-contaminate and cause food poisoning. You don't want that as a restaurant because that's liability. That's also equally as important for the cancer fighter, right? Because you've got a compromised immune system. So you want to avoid all those bacteria and those viruses and anything that can make you extra sick and make it extra hard to eat because you want to keep those nutrients up. So I'm going to say it one last time. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. Okay. So that is safety and sanitation. That brings us into basic nutrition. I told you guys we're going to cover 3 basic things tonight. A lot of the bulk of the information was in our previous class, but this is good follow-up information to just solidify what we know and what we do. So basic nutrition, what we're going to cover here are calories. That's the first part. And then we're going to talk about macronutrients. I'm not a dietitian. I'm not the expert in this and calculating what nutrients you need and how much you need of this. That's what an oncological dietitian is for. But what I'm going to help you guys do is understand it in a way that will make sense to you and it'll help you apply it into your everyday life. So the first thing people always wonder is, what the heck are calories? All right, calories are really the way that we measure the potential energy in food. Think of it like the gasoline in your car. If your body is the car, calories are the measurement system by which we measure the fuel. So specifically, it'd be the gallons of gasoline in your car, right? So my car holds 24 gallons of fuel. So that would be like 24 calories, right? So a calorie is nothing more than a unit of measurement, like a watt for a light bulb, a gallon for fuel, a liter for a soda, or 12 ounces, a teaspoon. It's just a unit of measurement, right? And the commonly agreed upon number that they always throw in everything is 2,000 calories a day. For a 2,000 calorie diet, you need X amount of this and X amount of this, right? And whenever you look at that label, that's what that means, right? Well, calories are it's really easy to calculate how many you need. It's really easy to calculate how much you don't need, right? And it's very simple. So the reason people lose weight, all right, so there's 3 states that your body can exist in. There is calorie deficit, which means you don't have enough calories, and that means you lose weight. There's calorie neutral, which is where I've been for the last month because my diet's not going so well this month. Calorie neutral, which is where you intake or eat as many calories as your body burns, right? Okay, and then there's calorie surplus, and calorie surplus is where you eat more calories or you consume more calories than your body has burned. So if you burn 2,000, right, let's say that's the bar. Calorie neutral would be you ate 2,000 calories every single day, it's neutral, right? Calorie deficit would be I ate 1,500 calories, so I have a 500 calorie deficit. If you do that for 6 days, you lose a pound because there's 3,000 calories in 1 pound of fat. It's a fun little piece of math. And then calorie surplus is the opposite, right? Let's say you need 2,000 and you eat 2,500. After 6 days, you'll gain a pound, right? So if we're losing a lot of weight during chemo treatment, it's because we're not eating enough calories. And so we can sit down with our dietitian or an online calculator, whatever works for you guys, and we can figure out exactly how many calories we need to stay neutral, gain, or lose, right? Your dietitian may say, okay, I need you to eat more calories. And so that's what calories are. They're just the measurement system for which we measure how much fuel we're putting in our body. So that's it. That's all calories are. They're just a measurement system. If you have too many, you gain weight. You have too few, you lose weight. And so if we're losing weight, we need to increase our calories. And if we're gaining weight, right, typically if you're like a normal office worker or you're overweight, right, you want to decrease your calories, right? So you can start losing weight. So that's what that means. And that's how you can start thinking of calories. It's just gaining weight and losing weight is nothing more than math. That's all it is. It's just addition and subtraction. If you got too many, it adds up, right? 1 + 1 is 2, and 2 + 2 is 4, and so on and so forth, right? But 2 - 1 is 1, right? So we start losing when we start subtracting. So if you're losing weight, we want to up those calories. Talk to your dietitian to get exactly how many they want you to have, and that way we can start counting those calories to get an idea of, are we calorie Are we having a surplus? Are we having a deficit? Are we gaining weight? Are we losing weight? And that'll really help you take control of that because it puts it in a measurement system that you can completely and totally understand. So now we're going to go over macronutrients. So you guys, if you've ever been in a gym or you've been around anyone who really cares about fitness, you hear, oh man, you got to hit those macros, man. And those macros, that's what it's all about. So macronutrients is really just a fancy way of saying the major food categories, right? So I break them up in a way it's a little bit different than the average person, but it's a lot easier to understand. So in my system, there are three types of macronutrients. There's proteins and fats, and we combine these together because they typically exist together, right? Carbohydrates and starches, because those tend to exist together, and vitamins and minerals. So proteins and fats they're the building blocks of your muscles, right? They're the long-term burning fuel, and you'll never find protein in nature that exists without fat. And the reason for that is because muscle tissue or plant tissue, any kind of anything with a lot of amino acid in it always has fat pockets next to it, whether it's beans or tofu or pork or beef or bacon or chicken or whatever it is. Especially in animals, in animal structures, there's always fat with the protein because muscles need the fat deposits for the carbohydrates that they release to help fuel the cells without getting too complicated. So to keep it nice and light. So we have proteins and fats. We need proteins and fats because fats are a long burning fuel and proteins are what help our body rebuild. And this is really important when we're losing weight or when we are trying to rebuild after a surgery, right? When you have surgery, your body is just all beat up. That's why you're covered in bruises and all these things, right? Protein helps our cells and our DNA and our RNA replicate so we can make new cells. Also helps us build muscles so you can be all tough. You lift up the world, right? And like I said, the fat is the fuel cell with which proteins or muscles are activated. We all have muscles, whether they're tiny little muscles or super big muscles, right? Whether you're a weightlifter or just the tiniest little stick person, everyone has muscles. It's how you move, right? That's how your body moves like this. These are all actuated muscles going like that, right? That's all muscles and proteins, okay? So proteins and fats, that's the building blocks of your DNA, your RNA, cell replication, and of course, these guys, the muscles, right? Okay, so the next major group is carbohydrates and starches. Carbohydrates are the simplest form of fuel for your body. That's actually what your body burns is carbohydrates. And when I say burns, there's not actually it always sounds like there's this fire going on inside your cells, like we didn't start the fire, right? No. It's a chemical reaction, and they call it burning, but it's not really burning. It breaks it apart, and it has potential energy, and it's complicated. But carbohydrates like glucose, which is part of sugar, is the most basic fuel for your body. Your bloodstream carries it to all the parts of your body that you need. There's a whole complicated explanation there, but the more complicated form of carbohydrate, right? We have glucose and sucrose and fructose. They start turning into what are called starches, right? So when you think about sugar, okay, sugar is a carbohydrate. Starches like potatoes, right? Potatoes and rice and things like that. Those are complicated storage mechanisms for carbohydrates, and we cook them, and they have starches in them, and then they break down into carbohydrates. And that's kind of how that works. So carbohydrates and starches are the fuel, right? That's what we use to have energy, to get excited, to go running, to go jogging, to lift that weight. It's also one of the things that we use as a reward, right? Chocolate is delicious, of course, but it's full of carbohydrates. And these sugar carbohydrates, you remember how we talked about last week, how we tasted the sugar and it lights up all the dopamine receptors in your brain because it makes you all happy, because you're naturally predisposed to seek out sugar because it's a fuel for your body. So when you eat chocolate, you get happy, right? Because it's got the sugar in it. So the carbohydrates and starches, this is the energy that we use to go on a daily basis. And then of course, there's vitamins and minerals. Vitamins and minerals the minerals form the basis of a lot of different components, right? Think of it like the little bits and gears inside of a watch. They make up all the different functions and moving parts. Like vitamins are actually the things that regulate different parts of your body, or they're turned into different hormones or different chemicals inside your body. And the minerals are used to assemble things like, for example, calcium in your bones, right? Vitamin D, which is a vitamin, helps your body absorb calcium and deposit it onto all your different bones and helps rebuild them after they've been injured or broken or so on and so forth. So that's kind of their function. I know it's a little bit dry, but that's what it is. So proteins and fats are found in anything that's going to be a meat. It's going to be a meat substitute. So it could be like the Impossible Burger from Whopper. That actual Impossible Burger is going to be a protein source, but it's also paired with fat inside of it. You could have a steak. That's going to be a protein source. Mushrooms are a protein source. Beans, legumes, nuts, all those things, those are protein and fat together at the same time. And you'll never find protein in nature that does not have some form of fat on it. Even the leanest of lean proteins like chicken breast still has fat present inside of it. Just not as much as, say, for example, a porterhouse steak, right? Got a big piece of fat in there, right? So you got the proteins and the fats. So those are what help to rebuild our muscles, help to build our cells division, help to do a lot of stuff. Carbohydrates actually build the cell walls of our cells. And carbs and starches, they're found in all kinds of places. Sugar, candies, potatoes, rice, grains, oatmeal, barley, wheat, anything that's going to be on that, when we think about that food pyramid, anything that's that lower part, a lot of stuff you eat for breakfast. It's going to be a lot of carbohydrate and starch. And then vitamins and minerals, these are going to be literally the vegetables and the fruits and all that kind of stuff. That's not to say that all three of these macronutrient categories, proteins, carbs, and vitamins and minerals, can't be found together at the same time. As a matter of fact, like, for example, mushrooms are a great source of protein, right? But they're also, because of the way that they grow, a great source of minerals and vitamins. As a matter of fact, portobello mushrooms have one of the highest sources of vitamin D in the entire world. It's one of the best naturally occurring sources of vitamin D. But they're also high in iron and potassium and a lot of other things because of the way that they grow. Fun fact, because I grew mushrooms over the summer, I'll share my wisdom here. Mushrooms actually come as carnivorous and plant-like. It's really neat. There are mushrooms that eat plants and eat other mushrooms and bugs and things like that. And then there are mushrooms that actually act like plants and just absorb things out of the ground. Mushrooms are an unbelievably fascinating subject to me, and I will stop talking about them now. But the most important thing here is not to understand how much you need or what you need. That's the job of your oncological dietitian, right? They will be able to work with you on your specific nutritional needs because every single person is different, right? You're different, I'm different, we're all different. So work with them to figure out exactly what your nutritional needs are. This is just a light guide, okay? So macronutrients are also important to know because one of the things you'll kind of think about when you make a dinner, right? Everything already kind of tends to have proteins and fats, carbs and starches, vitamins and minerals in cooking to begin with, right? Think about a steak dinner. You go out to a nice steak restaurant. What do they give you? They give you a salad, a baked potato, a little bit of broccoli, and a piece of steak, right? A steak is your protein and fat. The baked potato is your carbohydrates and starches. The broccoli is your vitamins and minerals, and then the lettuce is your vitamins and minerals as well. So when we make plates or start with our next section, which we call meal planning, it's already naturally happening when we're making these plates, when we're making these foods, when we're designing these menus. So let's move on in. I feel like I've beaten that pretty hard. So let's go into meal planning. Part 3 is meal planning. And we're going to talk about making a menu. So I got a little bit of extra time, so I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on this subject. So making a menu is not hard, but making a menu is something that you should do. And for those of you who are like sitting here going, what the heck is a menu? As a chef, when you run a restaurant, you have to design literally that piece of paper that goes in your hands. And when you sit down at that table, that menu that you see there, right? Somebody actually invented that. Sometimes it slowly changes over time because they've been in business for 40 years. And some days it's a pop-up and somebody said, I want to make this, this, and this, and that's all we're doing. But that menu is not just something you order off of. It's also something that you can do inside your home. So a really helpful skill that you guys can learn is how to make a menu for the week. And making a menu for the week is really simple, and it actually will save you time, money, and energy, which are 3 things that you cannot replace, except for money, but money takes time and energy also to replace. So they're all things that are of a finite supply at all points in time. So what we want to do is we want to we're making a menu, we want to brainstorm 10 meals that you'd want to eat each week, right? And what you want to do is you want to sit down. So for say for example, you say, I want to eat pasta con broccoli, I want to eat spaghetti and meatballs, I want to eat a steak, and I want to eat, chicken tzatziki, right? Or something like that. Okay, what you do is you brainstorm 10 meals you want to eat for the week. Then you make a list of each ingredient for each meal, or at least the major ingredients. Like, okay, it's pasta, it's spaghetti, it's chicken, it's cream, it's so on, it's onions, and so on and so forth. Okay, make a list of the ingredients. And then of course, like we talked about in the last class, we want to remove the seasonings and spices and ingredients that you don't like, right? So for example, when we talked about the chili, if you don't like the cumin, you can take the cumin out of the recipe, okay? So that's an important part to do there as well. So the next step is we want to remove meals that don't have similar ingredients, unless you want to have a really special meal, right? So we plan 10, and then we cut it down to 5 or 6, because if you cook 5 or 6 dinners, that's typically way more than you can even eat in an entire week. 1, 2, 3, or 4 people. You'll have a lot of leftovers that you could pick off of for lunch and things like that. So you remove the meals that don't have similar ingredients. So for example, we had chicken tzatziki, we had spaghetti with meatballs, and then we had pasta con broccoli, right? These are all, 2 of these are cream-based sauces with a pasta. The other one is a red sauce, and then the last one is a steak dinner, right? So steak dinner doesn't have anything in common with these other 2. So to make it easy on our time, budget, and money and energy, we take these 3 and we throw away that last 4th, that steak dinner, okay? Unless you want to make a special meal. Then you make a list of the ingredients that you need, every last one, seasoning, spices. You go through your kitchen and then you see what you have and what you don't have. And then you go to the grocery store and you buy them. And when you get everything, you bring it home, and you can save time by prepping the common ingredients, right? So one of the things that we do in our house is we buy pre-minced garlic. That makes my life easy. But if I know that I'm buying onions and carrots and celery and all these other things that I'm going to use 3 or 4 times in the week, what I'll do is I'll get these little food safe containers. You can order these on the internet or buy them at Walmart, whatever you want. Little portion baggies. And what we do is we actually will pre-cut and pre-portion using just a cheap little scale we got at Walmart, right? Little digital scale. And what we do is we will actually pre-cut and pre-cook a lot of things to save time, money, and energy, right? So for example, if you know you're going to need chicken for 3 or 4 nights, right? You can go buy a big pack of chicken. And what you can do is you can season it very lightly, salt, pepper, maybe a little garlic, oregano, right? Cook it in your oven for 45 minutes at 375 degrees or until it hits 300 or 165 degrees internally. Pull it out of the oven, let it cool down, you can slice it. Well, one of the things you can do is you can take little bags like this with a little baggie holder. These are fantastic, by the way. And you can actually take this like this. It holds it open for 1 person. You put it on your scale. And what you can do is you can just portion it out. That's all there is to it, right? Put 4 ounces of cooked chicken in there. And then you write on the front with a permanent marker, 4 ounces cooked chicken, and it will save you an unbelievable amount of time and energy. And you just take that and you can refrigerate it or you can freeze it. What we do at our house is I smoke some pork loin, I smoke chickens, I smoke all kinds of stuff, and then we break it down into small portions and we pull out exactly how many portions we need because, like I talked about previously in the last class, cancer treatments take a lot of time. There's a lot of time and there's a lot of energy that you don't have, and you just don't have the time or the energy to invest in constantly being exhausted cooking all the time, right? Because cooking takes time, it takes energy, it takes a lot of stuff. So that is basically meal planning. And meal planning is really simple, right? It's not complicated. You just break down your categories. What do you need in each meal, right? You need proteins and fats, carbohydrates and starches, vitamins and minerals. And of course, like we talked about last week, it's all about relearning your preferences and what you like in a dish and what you like to cook and what you want to eat, right? And what does it taste good to you, right? Make that list of things that taste good or sound good. And if you've got that list from last week, like we talked about, of what works for you, what doesn't, what do you like, what you don't like, we could say, oh, I really want this, right? And we can look back in our tasting journal and say, oh, well, I can't do pasta con broccoli because I don't like the way that broccoli tastes. So maybe we'll throw away the broccoli and we'll substitute it for cauliflower. I like cauliflower. Do you guys like cauliflower? I don't know, right? you can substitute that for something else and you can make your own, because recipes are not facts. Recipes are opinions, right? You can make them your own. It's all about what you like. So that is meal planning kind of in a nutshell. So we make our menu, brainstorm 10 meals that you want to eat each week, make a list of the ingredients needed for each meal, remove the seasonings and spices and ingredients that you don't like, remove the meals that don't have similar ingredients. This should leave you with about 5 recipes. Typically, you want to go to the store with about 5. Actually more than enough for lunch and dinner. Of course, you got to still buy breakfast stuff that you like. Of course, you buy the ingredients, and then you can save time by prepping the common ingredients like chicken or pork or beef, bacon, potatoes, onions, whatever you're going to reuse over and over again. Like if you're going to use a lot of red peppers this week, cut up all your red peppers when you get back. Just take an hour, pre-prep all your stuff, and it'll save you, instead of having to spend an hour prepping your meal each time you cook, you can then spend 20 minutes cooking because everything's ready to go, and you just pull it out and do it. Right? And this is what we do in restaurants. Like if you go to a Chinese restaurant, you get General Tso's chicken or sweet and sour chicken. They don't bread that sweet and sour chicken for you every single time that you order it. We make these big batches of it, and then we freeze it because it's 3/4 cooked. It's cooked just enough to be safe, and we throw it in the freezer, and we pull out the portions as we need them. Same with General Tso's chicken, or if you make lo mein noodles, all the lo mein's pre-cooked. Or if you go to an Italian restaurant, the reason that pasta can come out so fast is because all the pasta is par cooked. All we do is we re-saute that chicken, we make that sauce, we toss the pasta in that sauce to heat it up, or we lightly boil it for a second to bring it up to temperature. And so that's meal planning, and that's a little bit of a little hint for you guys on how to make your life a little bit easier and make it a little bit more efficient. And that is pretty much everything I needed to cover in this class. It went a lot faster than I thought I was going to. So I think I would like to open the floor for questions. If anyone has any questions from last week, from last week's class, or if you'd like me to elaborate on any subjects that we talked about today.